I'm going to date this interview, David, because we're at a really interesting juncture in the life of this film. So outside award season, you're on the very last legs of the process. We're at Fantasia right now. You travel with the film to a couple of international fests. And we also had the experience of having 1 week in the can theatrically.
Yep.
The film was picked up prior to Sundance, and we don't need to gloat or sell A24, but talk to me about the creative experience of working with an outlet that sees film marketing in a whole different paradigm. Like they really have moved the goalposts, if you will, and have brought along a strong creative sense to what it is to identify the market, the potential audience, and totally embed the creative spirit inside the process of marketing. Maybe if you can give me an anecdote, let's say, of how it was to work with them. You had the pop-up shop, but like perhaps just one meeting, or like how it was to be in the hands of people that are hyper creative.
I don't have an anecdote to relate, but what I can talk about is going to their office for the first time, which was only a matter of weeks ago. And I've been to the offices of other distribution companies and studios, and they all kind of feel the same. And you get to A24, and it's this big open loft floor on a building in New York, and there are just rows of tables with IMAX on them, and everyone is in one room. They're all crammed together into one room, and all the people who I'd been communicating with on email and telephone for months at that point, whether they be the marketing executives or the marketing team or the David and Daniel who run the company, like everyone is sitting in the same space, all just side by side, working together simultaneously. And I thought to myself, oh, that's how they do it. There's not that much overhead. Everyone is in the same room together. Ideas are constantly exchanging and flowing back and forth. They have two little rooms to go to if they have to have a meeting or a phone call. But other than that, everyone is jammed into the same space together. And you just feel like this creativity rippling through that space, and it's a beautiful thing. Like as soon as I walked into that room, I realized, oh, that's why it works the way it works. Coming from where I am as a cinephile, all of their marketing reaches me. I see all of the cool things they do. I applaud all of their efforts to get these films out in creative ways, and I thrill to all of them. They're all exciting to me, but I was never sure how far those efforts reached beyond me. I will pay attention to everything because I care, and I want to see these weird movies in the theater, and I want to engage with them on the level that A24 clearly wants audiences to engage with them. I'm the perfect audience, but how do you get the movies out beyond the people like me who will be there on opening day regardless?
Exactly. That's
been really great to see. It's been great to watch them take all of this amazing marketing material that they've accumulated and all of these crazy ideas like the Ghost Store and push it out beyond the cinephile audience or beyond the audience who is already so attuned to what A24 does.
Exactly, yeah.
They have a cult audience already, so that's great. They've got they've got their own fans, and it's wonderful when a distributor can have fanboys.
Take a look at your creative process. It's very much a family process. Everybody that's contributed on a previous film was there when you were making the short films, when you're making films on a dime. I'd like to specifically talk about your relationship with Casey in terms of Casey's a filmmaker in his own right, and you brought him back for Ain't Them Body Saints. When did you obviously you're given a whole slate of different actors who can be in your feature film. How do you perceive Casey, like from a cinephile perspective? Were you a fan of his during the Gus Van Sant years, or was it a little bit later on when he was sort of like really getting into his craft? Like I wrote down Dominic and Winterbottom's films, like just before the 2010 era. Like those were really significant roles for him. How did you, before meeting Casey, what was your rapport with Casey the actor in terms of a cinephile?
I was certainly a fan, and I feel like Jerry was one of the most important films for my development
Yes.
as a filmmaker and as a film goer. It rocked my world in all sorts of ways, and I'd certainly been aware of him prior to that in Good Will Hunting or the Kevin Smith films, but
Yeah.
that was the one that really made me a fan.
Yeah.
Really, the fact that he and Gus and Matt are all they wrote that movie together. Gus directed it, they acted in it. It felt like such a creative partnership, a collaboration, and the film itself was so profound to me.
Mm-hmm.
I just from that point forward, I was like, I'll see whatever this guy does. He's obviously there's a lot going on there.
Yeah, that was a significant film of his.
It was, and that was introduced me to Bellatar. There was like such a wonderful stepping stone, and when you see someone make a movie like that and you engage with it, you sort of just naturally assume that you have the same taste as them, that you share a taste in cinema and in all sorts of different proclivities.
Mm-hmm.
So I certainly was aware of him, or was a fan of them from that point forward. The assassination of Jesse James definitely deepened that. I think that's just one of the top 20 films of the century, without a doubt.
Uh-huh.
And the work he does in it is truly exceptional. I also just love that he's vegan. That was always a nice little feather in the cap, because I felt a little kinship with him on that regard. So when we got around to making Ain't the Body Saints, and I was asked who would you like to meet with about this movie, he was on the top of the list. We met. Sure enough, we have the same tastes, we have the same influences, we like the same things, we eat the same food.
Cool.
So it just was a natural fit on that film. And then once you develop a working relationship with someone who you enjoy being around, it's easy to call them back.
Uh-huh.
You just want to keep that going, because so much of the stress of the filmmaking process comes from having to explain yourself to someone or having to convince someone to trust you. And when that trust is already there, it just makes the entire process easier.
They announced the selection for Sundance back in, I think it was late November, early December.
Yeah.
And so I like to think that I'm in the know, but this was perhaps one of the best kept secrets in during this era, specifically social media era. We know everything that's happening. How did you guys? Was that a deliberate choice to sort of camouflage? Hey, we're getting these two big actors in the middle of I think it was Austin, perhaps somewhere in
Dallas. Yeah.
In Dallas, if you could just elaborate on that specifically, because I think that's almost like a miracle in this day and age.
All of my films, post Saint Nick.
Yeah.
I've had that instance where they get announced in the trades before you start shooting. And as soon as that happens, I always feel this little bit of pressure.
Uh-huh.
There are suddenly expectations and anticipations attached to this movie that doesn't even exist yet. And as much as I'm always trying to, remain in a bubble and focus on the matters at hand and try to make the movie that I want to see, as soon as I know that people are anticipating it, I start to dilute my own intention a little bit, because I want to satisfy all of those people who are already forming preconceived notions about what that movie might be.
Mm-hmm.
And that's troublesome. That can get in the way of the creative process and get in the way of making a good movie. And I didn't want to be burdened by that on this film, particularly because this film was a very delicate creature. It was a very risky endeavor. It was very high concept. There was a high risk of falling flat on our face with it, and I didn't want to, have a movie that I decided, this movie was so small that we could have, had it not worked, we could have buried it and not had, we wouldn't have been in the hole, or
exactly.
We wouldn't have lost that much money.
Uh-huh.
So I wanted to have the freedom to know that should it go sour, should it not turn out, I could bury it and no one would ever ask me what happened to it. So that was the prerogative when it came to keeping it a secret. The actors were completely on board with that. They were excited by it.
Yeah.
They wanted to keep it even more of a secret than I did, but I had to let their agents know.
Yeah.
We had out of respect to our working relationship.
Of course.
And obviously people knew we were making something, because we didn't prohibit Instagram posts. We just made sure that no one was posting things that...
You got a sense that there was maybe a short film.
Yeah.
But
it could have been a short film, it could have been a music video or a commercial.
Exactly.
Something was being made, but we didn't, put any sort of emphasis on it being anything important, or certainly didn't let anyone know that there were actors in town. And And it was very, everyone working in the movie respected that, and out of that respect, we managed to maintain that.
It's fun. It's so much fun. It's refreshing.
It's fun too. I should underline that. It is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I love.
So post-screening Sundance, my experience, I'm like, oh, this is so genial. He got Casey and Mara, Rooney together for 2 days, and then just threw a blanket on whoever extras and worked that way. I thought that was brilliant. And then I find out that no. People, Casey was literally underneath this sheet. So I was wondering if you could discuss performance in terms of postures, in terms of gestures, and how do you relate anger or melancholy or yearning through a physical performance that is sort of like, there's a buffer zone there.
It was intended to be a very physical performance, in so much as I was expecting Casey to get to use his body language in a fairly, recognizable fashion. I knew that we were robbing him of facial expressions and we were robbing him of his voice, but I felt that he could perform under that sheet in a very physical sense, and audiences would know that it was him.
Mm-hmm.
So we shot one scene with him, the scene where Rooney's in bed crying and he's sitting by her side, and that was the first time that Casey put that sheet on. And then we shot the scene the next day at the hospital where he wakes up for the first time. And that was the first time we see him up and moving around in the bed sheet. And it was very recognizably him. It was crazy how recognizable he was under the sheet. Even before, when he first sits up, the eye holes aren't there yet.
Mm-hmm.
And in the finished film, it ends after he sits up. But when we shot that scene, that shot continued. That composition held for another minute or two as he sits up, gets up off the gurney, stumbles around the room, and eventually makes his way out the door. And in that process, it was very clear that it was him. And it was almost surreal how much the sheet exaggerated his physical traits. Like he has a very specific way of walking, a very specific way of hanging his head. He slouches a little bit, and the sheet just magnified all of those things. So even though we didn't see his face, it was very clearly him. But the other thing that happened was that it was very clearly an actor with a bedsheet over their head, and it felt too corporeal. It felt very clunky, and to be honest, it felt quite silly. So from that point forward, we started refining the way in which the costume was utilized and the way in which he acted underneath it. And by, we just sort of removed every bit of his body language and every bit of his performance. And once we had done that, it became clear that we could put someone else under there, which we did do from time to time. But the process of directing him was as mechanical as a directing process can get. We would just roll the camera, and I would just, shout the directions to him. And the costume is very thick, and it's got this mask that is kind of covers your ears, so it's hard to hear. It's very hard to see. And so I would just shout these directions loud enough for him to be able to hear, and I would speak at the pace at which I wanted him to move. So most of the performance is him standing perfectly still and then turning to look at something. So if that was happening, I'd be like, hold still, now turn very slowly to the left, hold. So it would be like that. And that elicited a very profoundly empathetic a very empathetic performance on screen, even though the process of doing it was 100% unemotional.
Sticking with the bed sheet, so the bed sheet is actually we find your characters are wrapped in it when they have their intimate moments. Obviously, and going back to one of the first scenes where we see the dearly departed, and there's also like just the sense of moving from one place to another. Usually you wrap things up in bed sheets, or you terminate a certain life by putting sheets on furniture and stuff. And so I was wondering if this idea sort of like if that had morphed away from like how do we conceptually build the idea of the ghost, if that was an imprint that you wanted visibly in those other scenes, because bed sheets, like I was saying,
everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. They have multiple. But it has a very, there's a, when we see pictures of newborns, we wrap them up in something that's sort of
very
like
similar.
Yes. So I was wondering if that's something that conceptually built into some of those scenes.
It definitely was,
Okay.
and it came about, as we were developing the scenes. It just saw opportunities to include that imagery, and to include it in an emotional way, because all of those things you just mentioned they're all like emotional moments in the film.
Yeah.
And they take on an emotional weight. And initially, when I first thought about the fact that this ghost would be wearing a sheet, I just found it amusing. I didn't think about all of the emotional aspects of it, and that there were all of these corresponding symbols in everyday life that also carry a great deal of emotional weight.
Yeah.
The bedsheet ghost comes from stage performances in which characters, whether it's like Hamlet's father or whoever it might be, it needs to be represented as a specter from beyond the pale, and so they would put a death shroud over them, and that's where that came from. But there are those shrouds everywhere we look, and they often come in moments of, like you say, like furniture being moved. You put a sheet over it, and it has this sense that it's being put off into another realm. It's odd how that image can connotate in a very subtle and mundane and quotidian fashion a sense of the ethereal. So we looked for ways to include that, and we looked for little moments where that fabric could be utilized beyond the protagonist of the film's outfit. There were more opportunities than we actually used. We saw like places everywhere. We could have filled the entire movie with bed sheets, and we wanted to keep it somewhat limited. But nonetheless, they were, that imagery became something we looked for.
I'd like to talk about the whole portion of the film that goes to the idea of foundations, with I would say Civil War era, but it's probably predates Civil War era.
Yeah, a little bit before.
Wagon era.
Homesteaders.
Yeah, if you could talk about integrating that aspect into the film. I like the idea that you see them specifically putting pegs, and then his daughter leaves a small memento. I was wondering how much of that was researched, and the importance of that specifically for you in embedding that sequence in this film.
It wasn't particularly researched, although the fate of that family is based on things I've been reading about in Texas history. That happened all the time. People would lay out a plot of land and establish as a home, and then they'd be slaughtered in the night by one entity or another.
Yeah.
And so that was the only thing that was based in actual research. But I love the idea of, clearly from this film, it's pretty evident, I love the idea of the history of a physical space. And I wanted to go back to the earliest version of that space being defined by a human being. And so we see this settler taking, the untamed land and constraining it to four corners with these stakes he's hammering into the ground. And then we see this little girl define that space further with something personal. That's what we do in our homes. That's what we do with any place we enter. We figure out a way to make it our own. And yet it's not our own, because as evidenced in the film, they don't survive that much longer. And whoever builds the next house, evidently that house didn't last that long, and eventually it became the house that Casey and Rooney live in, and they both leave. So the spaces that we occupy are our own temporarily, and we do everything we can to define them with extensions of ourselves, whether that be art we hang on the walls, or the furniture that we move in, or the
books we read,
or even the mortgages that we pay.
Yeah.
And then all of that is gone, and the space remains. And I wanted to really hammer that home with that sequence by showing the genesis of that physical space in terms of its, man-made constraints, and also the extreme, temporary nature of our claim on those spaces. He and Rooney are basically playing my wife and I. And the scene in which he places the headphones on her ears was the final moment of a 10-page sequence that we shot, but which was then used throughout the movie. We knew that we would shoot this sequence, and that it would then be broken up in bits and pieces.
Okay.
And that sequence is a big argument. It's just an argument about where they're going to live. And I think over the course of the film, you see enough of it to pick up on that that's probably, that's a source of dissatisfaction in their lives. But we shot a lot of it, and we shot it multiple times in different rooms. We just tried different versions of it. And the ending of it was always going to be the song that they share. And I couldn't make Casey a filmmaker because that would have just been too obvious. But by making him a musician, which is the one other art form that uses time as a defining trait, and which also is an incredibly communicative art form, one that I think exceeds film in its ability to immediately pierce through a moment and hit us at our empathetic cores. It's a wonderful communicative tool, and so I felt that whatever this argument was, whatever the impasse they had, however bad it got, they could arrive at a point of sympathy for one another and empathy with one another if they listened to music. It's also him making in the literal context of that scene, it's a peace offering.
Yeah.
And so that was. The idea was developed hand in hand with that song, which I had already heard. Daniel Hart wrote that song for his upcoming album. He played it for me. I became obsessed with it and had already kind of started making Casey's character a musician. And so when I heard that song, I knew that would work its way into the movie in a very profound fashion. It was originally going to be the beginning of the movie. We'd see her listening to it once at the beginning. We'd see it in the middle when she's listening to it after he's gone, and then it would show up again at the end. But I decided to move it to the middle to really provide, in the plastic sense of the film's timeline, a turning point for Rooney's character. And it really does just both. Even though all that's happening in that scene is she's listening to this music, she's listening to these headphones, and we don't understand the context as an audience, it nonetheless provides so much catharsis for her in that moment. And music can do that. That's something that music is uniquely suited to. It's almost too easy as a filmmaker to turn to music, but it is something I keep doing. In Ain't Them Body Saints, Ben Foster sings a song for Rooney's daughter in that film. And that wasn't in the original script. We just wanted to have a moment where he connected with that character in a really meaningful way. And the obvious solution was to have him play a song. So we just turned to music once again, and it works. If you don't have to do it right for it to work, but if you do it right, it can really be something that gets through all of the artifice of the filmmaking, gets through all of the clutter of the story, and delivers an emotional moment that is succinct and true and profound, and which can work wonders for the film.
In your creative circle of trust, we find several of the same collaborators, and I'm interested in your collaboration with Shane Carruth. When he makes a feature film, you're there at I like to think of the editing phase perhaps as another fragile phase in the life of a film. So I'd like if you could discuss how that collaboration works, where he makes a feature film and you're there to sort of like give it a fresh pair of eyes, but then the same trust is then given to Shane when it comes time to chopping up this film. How does that collaboration work?
It's funny because it's almost accidental in both cases.
Okay.
With Upstream Color, he 100% intended to edit that film himself, but the shoot just went on for so long and was so overwhelming, and he was so exhausted that 2/3 of the way through he just couldn't edit the footage. He'd done little bits and pieces here and there, and had a little a sample reel that he put together to show people, but he just didn't have the headspace to work on the film after a long day of shooting. And that movie shot for upwards of 100 days. They shot for a long time on that film.
Wow.
And so I came in because I'd been working with Amy Simons already on her movie, and while she was acting in Upstream Color, I was cutting Sun Don't Shine, and it was just a natural progression to fall into Shane's orbit at that point. He and I already knew each other, but nonetheless he became aware of me as an editor, someone who was willing to work quickly and in rough circumstances, and I didn't want to disappoint him because I respected him so much, not just as a friend, but as a filmmaker. I wanted to make sure we maintained our friendship, and I knew he had incredibly high standards, so I didn't know if it would work out, but I just told him, like, the second that you are unsatisfied with anything I'm doing, just fire me, and we'll remain friends. But luckily that never happened, and the resulting project is one of the most profound and satisfying creative collaborations I've ever had. So when I started working on A Ghost Story, well, I guess before I jump to Ghost Story, I should say I never expect that to happen again. I think with the next time Shane makes a movie, which, knock on wood, will be soon, he will figure out a way in which he can edit himself, and if he needs me, I would jump at the chance. But I don't expect that to, be the case.
Yeah.
And so when I started working on A Ghost Story, I knew that I have the same problem. I can't edit while I'm shooting. I don't have the headspace. Maybe on the weekends I can, but usually on the weekends I'm sleeping. So I wanted someone to be assembling the footage as we went, just so we could see what we were getting. And I asked him, and he said yes. And I know he read the script early on because we talked a lot about it, but once he started cutting, he did the same thing I did on Upstream Color, which is just look at the footage, kind of try to make heads or tails of it based on what was shot on the day, and he started just assembling things in a way that was very almost contrary to what was in the screenplay. The screenplay was very rigidly linear, and he just threw that away and just started finding connections, looking for rhythms, looking for just juxtapositions that could spark some new idea. And that was really exciting to me. When I first saw the first 10 minutes that he put together, it's not anything that is in the finished film, but it showed me how plastic what I was getting on set actually was. That we could use things in new ways. We could find new meaning in images that I thought would be very rigidly defined by their initial intentions.
Cool. And
so that was a wonderful thing to get, to receive, to be given.
It's almost a luxury in a way.
It is, and he every day he was like, if you want me to just edit based on the script, I will. And I was like, no, just keep doing what you're doing, and it may not be ultimately what we use, but it is so helpful to see this footage that we are capturing in a completely different light than what I intended.
Interesting.
So that was great. And then once we finished shooting, he had to go off and work on this other project, and I took over, but I took over with a much greater sense of freedom than I probably would have had he not worked on it.
Cool. Are somewhat part of a larger Sundance family. Now, I don't know if you read trade news, but this week there was all these different items for people that were part of the Sundance family and then hit pay dirt. I'm talking about Ava DuVernay, Ryan Coogler, Reed Morano. They were all part of micro budget, making films on on credit cards and whatnot. So my curiosity is not for how does Pete's Dragon inform you on choices that you're going to make on this film specifically? How does working on a crazy budget sort of mutate and give you a fresh perspective on something that's very micro?
It's very rudimentary, the things that you learn. It's more akin to just getting better at the thing that you do, and the scale sort of falls away. So I got better as a filmmaker on Pete's Dragon because I learned how to be more efficient, how to say no. I learned, I understood my tastes more, and I was able to take those things with me onto a ghost story. But had I not made Pete's Dragon, had I made something else that was, you know, on the same scale of Ain't the Body Saints, I would have learned the same things.
Okay.
I would have learned how to make movies better. You know, each movie you make, you get a little better at it, hopefully.
Yeah.
And you take that, you know, you take those little minute improvements with you to the next one.
Mm-hmm.
So, if we want to talk about what I actually gained on Pete's Dragon that I couldn't have gained on something else, it is the things you would probably expect, which is an understanding of what visual effects can do, and how to shoot visual effects, and how to light an actor without getting green screen bounce on their face. Very practical things like that.
Yeah.
And we certainly use those tricks on A Ghost Story. There's an entire sequence in the movie that Weta Digital helped us with that is entirely, you know, we knew we could pull it off on a visual effects level because of my experience working with them, and then we were able to actually work with them on it to accomplish it on a level that is much higher than the budget of this movie should allow. So that's a very practical gain from Pete's Dragon, like a very quantifiable gain. You could almost put a number on it. But then there are also all of the unquantifiable things, such as just learning that I tend to do more than 6 or 7 takes, but when I get to the edit, I only use the first 2.
Okay.
Like that's something I've now come to understand about myself because I've done it enough times.
Yeah.
And so going forth on my next movie that I made this past spring, you know, when we were pressed for time, I would just think back to Pete's Dragon and A Ghost Story and think about how I would do 10 or 12 takes and then always use the first 2 in the edit. And so now I'm like, hey, let's just stop after take 2 because that's what I'm going to use. You learn things like that about yourself.
So the sailor bear guys love you even more, I guess.
You know, we all love each other, but yeah, definitely everybody's happier when you can finish a day on time. That's for sure.
My very, very last question, thank you so much for your time, is have you seen Olivier Assayas' Personal Shopper yet?
Yeah, I saw it while we were shooting my last film in Cincinnati, and I flipped out for it. Like I wanted to go watch it again immediately, but we were in the middle of a shoot, so I wasn't able to, and it only played for a week. I was impressed that it played for a week in Cincinnati, Ohio, and that there were a lot of people that went to see it. But nonetheless, I flipped out for it. I can't stop thinking about it. It's on iTunes now, and I want to buy it, but I also know Criterion's probably going to put it on Blu-ray, so I might just wait for that.
Yeah.
But or maybe I'll just get both. I've done that before. I have Under the Skin on Blu-ray and on iTunes, and Inherent Vice as well. So double dipping is sometimes important to do. But it's an amazing movie. I can't say that I completely understand it yet, but the fact that I don't completely understand it yet is one of the things I love about it. It's a real mystery that I can't wait to dig into more. And so immediately after buying it, or after watching it, the one thing I knew I could do was buy all of the music that is in the end credits by this artist named Anna von Hauswolf. So I went and bought all of her records, and that was my way of staying in touch with that movie over the course of the spring. And now that it's on iTunes, I should probably just go buy it tonight. I need to see it again.
It's funny, like when I experience a film like yours, and practically like it happens 3-4 times per festival, is I think a lot of us fanboys tend to try to like grab soundtracks and just put it together because there's no one official source, and I know that happens to me. My case is I jump immediately.
You buy all the things. And
I try to find it.
Yeah.
I try to make that playlist together. Anyway, David, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you.
And
thank you for the
consideration. I'm looking forward to seeing how this film will play out internationally, but
it's
also but good luck on the editing process for your new baby. So
thank you so much.
Thank you, David.